All right, welcome back, parents and co-teachers. So this next part two, is a deeper analysis. I'm gonna go over the film and some of the major themes and themes and stuff throughout it. However, if you do not want any spoilers for the film, I recommend you not watch this part until after the film, or if it's more analysis than you really would care to, it's totally fine. You don't need to watch this part. So my part one is just a basic what to look for before you go into the film. But if you're looking for that deeper analysis of what are some of the themes and stuff that's being dealt with within the film as it plays out, I'm going to go through that. So, last chance to leave for spoilers. Here we go. So, apologies for this. This is the notes I took during the film. So, I took about 5 pages, but I write a little big. So, I'm going to go through this a little bit to encompass what was going on in the film. First of all, after 28 minutes, finally the ads and trailers are done. For any of you that don't like horror films, there was a couple of ads for horror films, so just note that by the time you see it, maybe those films are still being advertised. So one of the first things the comments made is power over spice, power over all. So the first line, and this is a line from another part of the book, but basically it just sets up the theme that if you have power over the spice, you have power over the whole empire, the whole kingdom. We get a sense of the year. Also, it does start, interestingly enough, with Princess Irulan and the Emperor. Christopher Walken plays the Emperor. And this is to go over the fact that this is the political intrigue, because the Princess Irulan in the original book doesn't have many scenes with her, but she has these little intro paragraphs at the beginning of every chapter that explains kind of what's coming up in the chapter, as if this is a historian talking about things in the past. So you get a little bit of that. Also, in the next book Dune Messiah, she plays a much bigger role, um, especially because she's trained by the Bene Gesserit, just like the Lady Jessica. So there's a lot of shadow cloaks and daggers going on between these groups. Finally, we have an eclipse. We're talking about in the shadow, so that's really interesting that a lot of the Fremen are seeing their strength comes from an eclipse of the shadow. So we see that they are not always in the light. I think that's important where they come from and where their ideology is based. First scene, here we have Paul sleeping. This is very indicative of this sort of Carl Jung identity of the self psychology is what it's about. We've seen this in the beginning of the book and the beginning of part one, the idea of Paul sleeping, and this is symbolic of his transformation, that he's not awake yet, both in knowledge and also just not accepting who he is. So the fact that we see him sleeping at different stages in the film is not only set up for his visions of the future, but it also represents the fact that he's not come to terms with his destiny. That his role is to become this messiah-like figure and take over, and he's trying desperately not to become that figure. Also, we see a lot of the sand shots here, and we see especially the Fremen have a certain dominion over the sand. This will be important later because they have a real strong connection with nature, and that's something that Paul he needs to adapt to. At this point, the Atreides family was a very strong house, but they were not strong enough to overcome the events of part one in the movie. Paul sees the fact that he needs the Fremen and their knowledge and their ways in order to overcome the circumstances to follow. Okay, so he's moving out of the sleeping. He's starting to get a little bit more of his dreams as he gets interacted with the spice. Also, it's interesting to note that the fallen enemies are thumpers made so that the sandworms can come and eat all the enemies of the Fremen. This is interesting not only as the practical reasons why they're able to hide in the desert and hide their numbers, but it just also shows the sense of their ideology and purification, that the sandworms are a purifying force throughout the desert. Also, Harkonnens. As we get to see the Harkonnens, the opposing force, not only are they dressed all in black and white skinhead, right, reminiscent of a sort of neo-Nazi like look, but they use anger and violence to get what they want. That is their identity and trait, that they use not just their cunning, but they're also just constantly violent with one another. And we'll see that at first this appears to be a benefit to them because they're very scary to everyone, but later this starts to turn on them. They start to eat each other because of it. Um, and Paul is already starting to convert a little bit to the idea that if he is going to become this sort of Messiah like figure, he needs to convert some of the non believers. And part of this is a bit of a practicality. He wants to win them on his side because he does have some good intentions. He wants to help the Fremen rescue the planet from the Harkonnen, which he knows will just destroy the planet. They'll just totally eat it alive. So he wants to help them and he sees ways to do it, but he knows that means that he has to just consume them and take control of the Fremen to do it. So he's fighting that. Also, a really interesting to note is with Jamis, who he killed in fair combat in part one at the end. The ritual that they go through, the chanting, the religious symbolism, they extract his water because water is very important to the Fremen, but also important to the transformation of the characters. And they take that water and they put it into a collective pool, a sort of collective consciousness, you might say. Like if that was his thoughts, figuratively speaking, it's the thoughts of all the Fremen, and they put it in one collective area. And this is also weighs into their belief that they're collecting all this water to restore the planet to a paradise in the future. It's part of their ideology and religion. And it's all set up, and all Paul has to do is just take the necessary steps into that ideology and just say, yeah, I am that Messiah. I will bring that paradise, and they will follow. Now, the Lady Jessica, she goes through a transformation to become a Reverend Mother, and this is again important because she takes the water of life in order to do this, the water of life. And the water of life is symbolic of an old concept. It's sometimes called elixir. It's sometimes called like a philosopher's stone. What it represents traditionally in a lot of stories is this sort of like hidden knowledge, this greater knowledge and meaning. Like you can get past sort of the illusions of the world to see like a greater reality. And this knowledge comes to you and then you're able to do, grow as a human being, and plays a lot into sort of evolution and those aspects. So the water of life is really important to the transformation of the characters because it awakens them, becomes they become self-aware, and they become transformed as a result of it. Another thing is that Paul is again put in a position where if he does nothing, then a lot of people will start to look at him and go, "Oh, it's because he's very humble that these things happen." Also, if he does take an action, then they're like, "Oh, this is the prophecy being carried out. His actions are being done." So this is important to the transformation there. Also, as we see, is um, with the Lady Jessica, this will be an important part, is because she went through this transformation while she was pregnant, it affects her child, and her child is awakened. And this will be a part that really plays into the next part of the film. This played into the second book, Dune Messiah. When she's born, there's a sense of madness that happens with her. So there is a mental strain on the Lady Jessica now, and the scenes where she's talking with her child, which is quite motherly, but it's played out like her mind is sort of losing its way, and that kind of represents her sort of madness of the situation, that she's definitely using religion as a political tool rather than as a form of hope or some kind of greater spiritual connection. Uh, Paul goes to the desert. This is where Chani and the fulfillment of the dreams of the first part are being played out. Chani is a guide, a mentor for him. He has many guides and many mentors, which is why Paul Atreides is very strong. but Chani is the ultimate guide to fulfilling his destiny. She will lead him. Another thing to mark too, again with the Harkonnens, is more of the tech will be seen. Notice that the technology is very insect, and not only insect in its design, but very parasitic. It's very parasitic in its leaching and taking over the earth and draining of its environment and resources. Also, some of the scenes with the helicopters flying over, I got a lot of visualization from just guerrilla warfare from like Vietnam, which makes sense. Frank Herbert was over there as a journalist, and so I can see those images playing through in the movie. What's also interesting too is usul is used. That's a term that was technically used in the early part of the book, but they didn't put it in the first part of the movie. I assume probably because of just the confusion of it. But now they really use it as a means for his accepting of the tribe, and this is his first steps to making it. And one of the interesting part is he takes upon the name of Muad'Dib, which is the kangaroo mouse we see at the end of part one. The interesting part is this mouse produces its own sweat as a means to survive and drink water. But Stilgar, the main character, when he talks about the mouse being like a really great symbol, like, oh, Muad'Dib is a good name, he says the mouse produces its own water. And that's really important to his transformation because Paul is he is able to give to himself his own water, his own knowledge. His abilities mean that he will eventually surpass anyone. He will no longer need other people for knowledge. The knowledge will come introspectively from himself. Another big change is that he takes off his ducal ring. So at the authority of the Atreides, he kind of puts it in his pocket for later, and he's basically embraced the Fremen side, which is part good, but it's also him denying his destiny because he's trying to help the Fremen, but he's not accepting that he's also House Atreides, and there's another revelation to come that he's going to learn about. One other thing too to note about the Harkonnens is we're going to see their home planet, black and white. It's quite a spectacular visually. Is the way women are represented in this part is a lot of them are not very feminine. They have their hair shaved, and again they're violently um, sort of subjugated when need be. So that kind of plays a part in just how the Harkonnens they're very male centric. They're just not in balance. The Fremen, on the other hand, they're seen as very imbalanced. Women and males are seen as equal and things like that. So you can see where their ideologies are differ. Next is the big final test. This is in the trailer. Paul Atreides overcomes the sandworm, the dragon. We've seen this through a lot of Western stories, the sense of a dragon and the hero who slays the dragon to bring about his own transformation and progression of the plot. Here, though, important to it is the theme that Atreides, or Paul, he does not slay the dragon. It is a very sacred thing in their Fremen world, but he conquers and he is symbiotic with it. So there is a companionship there with them and the worms. And that's important to the ideology of not only the environment and the introspection, but also just the how to coexist in their environment. And meanwhile, Chani, you get a lot of looks from her. She's realizing that Paul is rising up, and she's like, "This is not a good thing," which is quite different in the book. Because in the book, she's pretty much on board with like, "Yeah, you're gonna be the Messiah. We all get it. We're all on board. We like this." Paul has a big dialogue with his mother. They're really talking about the hope, and he's strongly trying to push the idea that a Fremen among the Fremen should be their leader, and not this foreigner who comes in and takes over. And that's something wanted to be stressed a little bit more in this movie. Other parts are dealing with faith. It's dealing with prophecy. It's dealing with um, how strength is being perceived between the groups as we're moving throughout the scenes. Paul's desperately trying to fight his transformation, but it's definitely coming through. Later, we see with the Bene Gesserit is them coming to the revelation that Paul Atreides has survived and that this Muad'Dib who is helping them, that is Paul Atreides. So they're aware of this, and they're gonna move through their own shadows and their own plan. And this is where Fade Rotha comes in. Fade Rotha is a young upcoming Harkonnen, and he's presented as the nemesis to Paul. He is the counterbalance. He is the path that Paul could choose if he chooses just a path of violence. That's who Fade Rotha is. He's that darker side. We see the gladiator scene. It's quite impressive. Also, the interesting to note, the Colosseum is in a triangle shape, and triangles are depicted usually in symbolic meaning of being very sharp and dangerous. That there are things to be ward away from. That you should not go towards those shapes because they could be very hurtful for people. So he makes his transformation to that. He knows who he is, and he's embracing it. We also see another Bene Gesserit, the lady Fenring. She uses the voice, she's manipulative, she's trying to get Feyd-Rautha on their side. She marks later that desire and humiliation is a way to control him because control and power is an important aspect within the Bene Gesserit. But interestingly enough, as much as they have as much control over things, you can see that they're slipping. All the plans that they do, and that's a major theme within Frank Herbert's work, is this idea that you can't just control the future. You can't just like think through every possibility and pick the best alternative. There's always going to be something that's going to change that thinking, and you're going to have to find another way. So that's something he thought about. Also, there's a big scene. You'll see all the tanks and stuff, the black and white, and there's a big far angle, and you can see that it looks very reminiscent of that sort of fascist World War II Nazi patrolling down the streets. So you get a lot of that. Also, Roman Empire is a big theme of theirs, especially the fall of the Roman Empire. And that's quite interesting too, because the House Atreides is seen very Greek, ancient Greek, and the Harkonnens are the Roman Empire, which historically have conquered the Greeks, and so that's something that's sort of underlined in the film is those Roman ideologies coming through. Finally, they get with an old buddy, Gurney. He is help to help them reveal that there's atomics because, of course, this was a book coming from 1965 and after World War II. We talked about atomics all the time. So he's using the atomics as a way to help gain the leverage that he needs and try not to lose as many troops. The symbolic nature of it goes back to the environment and destructive nature because that's a part of warfare that is destructive and not it's not just about conquering your resources, it's about destroying resources in a way that nobody can enjoy them. But that's where Paul's if you can destroy a thing, you can control a thing. And so that's where he's like, I will destroy the spice. And that really causes a political shift because everyone needs the spice. It's the only planet that produces the spice. So it's a political tool. Finally, we will start to see the transformation of Paul. We see the water of life again. Channy is really trying to ward him away from it, but Destiny is really calling him. Uh, Robin was such a strong force in part one, but now we see him getting humiliated, and you can see that his violent ways are no longer helping. In the place of a greater fear, this Paul Muad'Dib is his ways are falling apart. So escalation is happening. Again, Paul is trying to make that desperate effort to avoid it. But after the Great Water of the Fremen is attacked, uh, Paul basically comes to the realization that there is no other way. He's tried to fight it, he's trying to find another path. But what makes the circumstances very tragic about the story is the fact that he can't control everything he wants to. Even the Emperor didn't want to attack Traus Atreides in the first part, but because they had grown so strong, he saw them as a political rival, and the Bene Gesserit convinced him that he should, but he was really heartbroken over it because he really thought Duke Leto, Paul's dad, was a great figure. So there's a lot of tragedy with a lot of the characters' decisions that fate is there. It's not controlled by the gods, but it's controlled by human action and the politics. Like there's a kind of sense that you're controlled by what happens and that you can't choose the actions you really want to be chosen. Finally, in He Takes the Water of Life, he goes through again a great sleeping about his transformation, and then awakening. And this time it's the final awakening. He has been transformed, and he completes all of his transformation by the big spoiler is that the Lady Jessica is father is the Baron Harkonnen, which means that Paul, is part Atreides and part Harkonnen. And this leads him down the path that he has to consolidate both selves, both areas of the houses. Those traits he needs to carry on to complete his transformation, which he accepts. And this is where, in the rest of the film, he does a lot of yelling and he's telling people what to do, and that's mainly for the fact that I would say he's embracing the Harkonnen side, that they use this sort of aggression, and he's trying to use the wisdom and compassion of the Atreides, but also the aggression of the Harkonnens to complete the task of finishing off this war. And he demands before all of them, this is what Frank Herbert would call the difference between like a moral law and an ethical law, that Paul is giving them an ethical law. I point the way among them because they had their rules and they're like, these are our absolute rules and this is our moral laws. But Paul is changing their culture and changing who they are by giving the ethical laws. And finally, he goes by Paul Muad'Dib, and that signifies his. And he puts on the ducal ring, and he's coming to full circle. He's accepted who he is, and he's going to follow through on all that he has to do as a character. And he gives a great speech. Long live the fighters. That's a big line from the film. It's a good thing he got that one. People were definitely fans of the book. Were looking forward to like, yeah, how's he going to deliver the long live the fighters? It's a big moral speech. For also, if you're looking for some symbolism, note that the flag that the Fremen are going to take into battle, that flag carries the Atreides eagle in the center, but the decoration of the flag itself is Fremen, and so that represents Paul Muad'Dib, right? He's both Atreides, Harkonnen, and Fremen and Bene Gesserit. He's a man of two worlds, and he's combined them all now into complete circle. And basically, the later part is pretty obvious that he overcomes his enemies. The enemies who used to stand above him, both physically, now he's gained the upper hand, and the camera will shift to him either looking down on the characters or the other characters like the Emperor will be on equal eye level, but they'll be looking down, signifying that they are beneath him now. He has grown over them. Also, during the fight, he's stabbed twice, and I think this is indicative of the idea that he's from two worlds, and so he's stabbed twice as his form of sacrifice. Right, the hero has to sacrifice himself to become the hero, or in Paul's case, a little bit of the anti-hero because it's going to bring around a great holy war later. But still, he faces those blades to show that he's paid the price for his transformation. And yeah, it kind of leaves on the idea that there's going to be a third movie, which everyone has been talked about that they were going to do. And will they call it Dune Part 3 just to make it simple for everyone, or will they call it Dune Messiah? We'll see. We'll see what happens. But it ends with Chani, and you see where she's coming, and she's the audience, but she'll come around in her arc. Right now, she doesn't have a strong arc. She's just kind of building, building, building. But Paul, despite the warnings, is just accepting that he has to be this Messiah figure. It's the only way he knows to help free the Fremen from the Harkonnens and overthrow the Empire and hopefully start the Empire anew and maybe do it better. This will come with a great holy war, so it comes with a price. And that was part of it, that these great leaders, there's a great price to be held. It's not just all glory and everyone wins in the end. There's quite a lot of sadness by the end. But yeah, overall, I think the film is quite artistically done. I think there's a lot of great themes to talk about, which is my point that I really like to do, especially with Christian themes, because we have a Christian ideology and it looks outside ourselves, and Paul is looking inside himself for salvation. So I think that's an important distinction and conversation to have, is that Paul reaches salvation through his own knowledge and transformation, and Christian ideology wise, we look outside ourselves for a salvation we could not obtain on our own, and there's an effect of that salvation, and it's one that is constantly intruded upon heavenly. The heavenly realm intrudes upon our ideology that we are having to always go back to Scripture and to reaffirm, what Scripture has to say rather than what we would kind of want to deal with the situation. So if you have any questions, just let me know. I can answer just about anything I can about the research and stuff done. But yeah, I think it'll be a very interesting film.